Go ahead.
All right. Good evening. I am calling the regular meeting of the University Place City Council for Monday, August 16th, 2021 to order. We are conducting our meeting remotely in compliance with the special Open Public Meeting Act rules issued by Governor Inslee's emergency order. May I please have roll call?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Figueroa. Councilmember Keel.
Present.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, present.
Councilmember McCluskey.
Councilmember McCluskey, present.
Councilmember Fleming.
Councilmember Fleming here.
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington.
He was here earlier. I'm assuming he may be having technological difficulties.
Mayor Belisi.
Mayor Belisi is here.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Okay. I understand that Councilmember Figueroa has also experienced some technological difficulties this morning. This evening. He is making his way to City Hall. So hopefully he will be here shortly. If not, I will ask for an excusal of his presence at this meeting should he not show up within the next half hour or so. So be prepared. Okay, at this time, may I ask Councilmember Pro Tem Lee to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilmember Pro Tem Lee. At this time, we are on the approval of the agenda. May I call for a motion for approval of the agenda as provided? Okay, may I have a motion, please?
This is Councilmember Keel. I move approval.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
This is Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, and I second the motion.
Okay, I have a second. Are there any objections to approving the agenda as provided? Okay, not seeing or hearing any, motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
could you just want to ask that the record reflect that Mayor Pro Tem is present with us?
Yeah, I was just going to do that. Thank you. Okay, since Councilmember Keel has already taken that part, we're on to our next item, which is the public comment section. As a reminder to the public, participation in the public meetings portion of this meeting will continue to be accepted via email. As of 5:30 this evening, we had no public emails received. However, should public decide to submit emails, they can provide such email and it will be forwarded to all council members. So at this time, we do not have any public that I'm aware of that is on this call this evening. However, I will provide a few moments if there are members of the public wishing to comment that are online. They can call 1-509-342-7253, provide the conference ID number of 880-278-843#. So I'll provide a moment here if there is somebody in the public that wishes to respond and provide public comment. Okay, I do not see anybody making an effort to contact us at this time, so I will close the public comment section and move on to our consent agenda item. I'd like to call for a motion to approve or amend the consent as provided. Mayor Pro Tem, you are muted.
Mayor Belisi, this is Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, and I move approval of the consent agenda.
Okay, I have a first. Do I have a second?
Councilmember Keel, I second.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Are there any objections to approving the consent agenda as submitted? Okay, hearing and seeing none, the consent agenda is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. We are on to our next item on the agenda, which is our city manager report. And I'd like to ask our city manager, Steve Sugg, to come forward and present his manager's report to us. Mr. Sugg.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Last week, we had our second concert of the season. We are happy to report that it was well attended. The well-known group who's cut 15 different CDs and played in many different venues here in America and in Europe. Pearl Django played to an appreciative audience. This Wednesday, we have music by Mambo Cadillac, salsa band, and the food truck is going to be Ruka. And just a reminder, on August 25th, we are celebrating the city's 25th anniversary as a city, 25 years of cityhood, with music by T-Town Aces and food by Velvet's Big Easy. And we're going to have a number of vendor booths at the Market Square. Again, all of these concerts are from 6 to 8 p.m. in the evening on Wednesdays throughout August, and including, we're moving it into September. The first Wednesday in September, September 1, we will end the series with music by Jovina Santos Neto. Just one final note, since it is event season, we don't stop there. In this coming out of the pandemic, and it just feels like we're never quite out of the pandemic, but we're able to do this safely. We're holding Jazz in the Village every Wednesday from 12:30 to 1:30 in the Civic Building. There's if you get a chance, check it out. Lisa Donovan is going to be the vocalist accompanying pianist Eugene Bien. Very, very high quality music. That atrium was really designed for those kinds of performance venues. So excited about this. Let's take advantage of this great summer weather and continue the event season. And more information as we go along, because we got something special in October as well to talk about. But I'll save that for the next report. Mayor, back to you on this.
Thank you, Mr. Sugg. I would like to let the record reflect that Councilmember Figueroa has shown up. He is shown on the screen as being Emilita Janita, but that is Councilmember Figueroa. So welcome to City Hall, Councilmember Figueroa. It's nice to have another body here in the chambers with me this evening. We are on the section of council comments and report outs, and Councilmember Figueroa, you first on the roll call. Do you have any report outs or comments at this time? Yes, no? Councilmember Figueroa.
I have to make sure that my computer is this. I'm not used to this computer. Is the microphone on?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Councilmember Figueroa does not have any comments at this time. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Figueroa. Councilmember Keel, do you have any report outs at this time?
I'm just so happy that our colleague made it to the meeting. Yeah, great. His dog ate the computer, so that's really good. Glad he could make it. For me, I can't remember if I don't think I gave the full report to this body. As you may know that Sound Trans has been in the throes of realignment, and we've been doing it for the past 17 months. It's pretty intense, where we start out at $12 billion short of our program, which meant what was promised to UP to come to the James Center right there down 19th was not going to happen anytime soon. And so I engaged with my fellow colleagues as their chair to figure out a way to fill that gap. Well, short story, it was a lot of pain and a lot of back and forth arguing and consternation, and the media was involved. A lot of people were involved. My goal, for those of you that know me, my goal is always to be truthful, honest, and transparent to people about where stuff is, regardless of how pretty it is. You know, if the baby's ugly, just, you know, hey, we got an ugly baby, you know, and you know, we love the baby, but it's ugly, you know, and we're going to take care of it. So that's kind of my approach. Others on my board did not necessarily have that approach. You know, they wanted to put some lipstick on it and make it smell good and do all that stuff and say, oh, just how great this baby is. And so bottom line is that we came up with what we're calling a hybrid approach, where the folks that want to, say the glass is half full, rather than me saying the glass is half empty, they've taken it a step further. The glass is half full, and they're going to drink the water out of the top half of the glass, is what they want to do. And so we've got a plan now that keeps old dates, but we don't have the money to keep the whole old dates. So basically what we're doing as a board and as a community up there is that they're working feverishly trying to come up with the money to keep those old dates, even though those old dates are published. And at some point in time in the future, there's a date out there where if they don't get the money, then the plan that I put in place, which is they call the safety net plan, which is the realistic plan, those projects fall to the dates that make sense based upon the money that we have. And so it was a long dance. I'm glad we got through it. I think it's something, it's a compromise, and I'm okay with that, because the pieces that I think that the voters needed to have in it was to keep them safe from not overspending money. And that's what the Plan B does when Plan A doesn't work. I hope Plan A works, but I don't see how it's going to work. We're getting money all the time, and it sounds like a lot of money, 100 million here, 200 million there, but we're short billions of dollars, not millions, billions. And so when we get 100 million from the federal government, that's great. But it's literally a drop in the bucket as to what our gap is. So anyway, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot more to come to that. And I had some AWC stuff too, but I can report that next time. Stan, did you have a question for me?
I
Yes.
did, if I may, Madam Mayor.
Councilman, if you have a quick question.
Yeah, thank you for that update. Much appreciated. My only question is, how does this program or proposal or implementation affect the funding that's coming directly from the Pierce County residents in terms of getting those stops put in down here in Pierce County?
Yeah, so great question. So there's something that's called sub-area equity, right? And so what we do with that is the monies that come in from the sub-area, like Pierce County, those dollars stay in Pierce County to fund Pierce County's projects. However, because we're building trains and the numbers are so big, a sub-area most times can't pay for everything themselves when it's time to build it. So what they do is if we're building down in Pierce County, we're probably not building anything in King County or Snohomish. So we will borrow money from Snohomish and King to make up the difference to pay for everything that we've saved for in Pierce, right? And so all the Pierce stuff is get done with Pierce dollars and with borrowed money from other sub areas. And consequently, we're done with all of our stuff. And now we're building in Snohomish, say. Well, now all the Snohomish County stuff gets built, with Snohomish money, but then they borrow back the money that they lent to us in Pierce, and we send it up to them so they can get their whole stuff built. So that's rudimentary how it works. There's still a lot more levers and switches that have to go into that. but the money that we raise here stays here.
Okay, thank you. Much appreciated.
Good evening, Executive Dammeier. You're not quite up on the agenda yet. If you could please turn off your camera, I'd appreciate it. We're probably about 15 minutes out. So, thank you. At this time, our next person up for council comments and report outs is Council Member Pro Tem Lee.
Council Member Pro Tem Lee, I have a, excuse me, one comment. I would like to invite you all to the groundbreaking on Thursday, this next Thursday, August 19th at 10 o'clock in Circ Park for the Veterans Memorial. It's a project that started over a decade ago, involved raising money. The city was gracious enough at that time to provide us Drum Park as a site for our project. And over this time, we have raised almost $60,000 for the memorial. Just recently, the city allowed us to move the project over to Circ Park and also provide funding to defray some of the expenses. That gave the project new impetus. And so we're happy to report that we're going to have groundbreaking here finally on Thursday at 10. And I'd like to invite you all to be there and see that first shovel full of dirt turned. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member Pro Tem Lee. Council Member McCluskey, do you have any comments or report outs at this time?
Thank you, Mayor Belisi, and I'm excited about the groundbreaking for the Veterans Memorial. It's a long time coming, and I look forward to being there with everyone on Thursday. That would be an exciting moment for University Place. A great spot for the memorial too. I'm glad we were able to switch the sites. And also the first Saturday of August was Movie in the Park, our annual Movie in the Park. We didn't have it last year due to COVID, and it started to come to fruition once again this year with the movie Moana, and it was well done with our events coordinator. There was hula dancing and Moana songs, and Moana was there, and blow up toys. I know Moana was there.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was looking for her partner so I could say thank you to him, but he wasn't there. But anyway, the kids had a great time and they loved and city manager Steve Sugg and I passed out all the UP paraphernalia of the foam hearts, in case they were stressed during the Moana movie with the volcano and everything. So, and the stadium seats, which were well received because the grass does get damp at night. So they were very grateful to have that. And our UP 25th anniversary pins and some other doodads we passed out too. And everyone in the crowd seemed to be very happy and appreciative that we were doing the movie and had all the amenities. And the food truck, I think, did really well there as well, which is important because we want the food truck to come back. And so I will close my report out. Thank you for the opportunity to do so.
Thank you, Councilmember McCluskey. Councilmember Fleming, do you have any comments or report outs at this time?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just quick comments. First, to Councilmember Lee, thank you for that invite. That's very exciting to really see another step of that project come into fruition. So that's awesome. I wouldn't be doing my part if I put on my other hat to remind citizens we're not out of the woods with the heat out there. So please, especially for our elderly and our young citizens, stay hydrated over the next week or so as temperatures continue to stay elevated through the rest of the summer. So hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. That's my message. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fleming. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, do you have any comments or report outs at this time?
Thank you, Mayor Belisi. And actually, Mayor Pro Tem Worthington has no report out tonight. So,
Okay, thank you. The only report out I have is that I attended Cities and Towns meeting virtually, of course, on the 5th of August. And at that meeting, we had Brian Schmidt from Pierce County from the Human Services Department. He deals with affordable housing and works with the document recording fees for the county. Every time property is sold within Pierce County, there are charges that appear on the closing statements to the seller for document recording fees. And those recording fees are statutorily required to be used for affordable and low-income housing. So he gave a report out on how the funding has been used since this program's inception. And it is statutorily required that 60% of those funds be spent in the county, and 40%, or rather 60% of the DRF funds goes to the county, and 40%, of course, goes to the state of Washington. Statutorily, there is also some requirements on how those funds are to be allocated within the county and cities in those counties. So even though it is collected and administered by Pierce County, the funds don't all get spent in Pierce County. There is a steering committee that makes sure that the funding is equitably distributed throughout the county, and they review projects, etc. And one reason I found this was particularly interesting is because this evening we will be talking about having our third study session on the SHAPE program that we may or may not choose at a later date to join. But this is kind of part of the struggle that all jurisdictions in the county are going through in finding affordable housing, etc. While the program administered by the county has to do with document recording fees and working with developers, the SHAPE project is more of an administrative overview to help provide guidance to jurisdictions and the county on how to make these projects more successful and fill the need that we are finding every day is out there for housing stability and affordability. So I just wanted to let you know that, remind you that we do have document recording fees. We do have the county that's overseeing the distribution of it, and that maybe with the SHAPE project program going through, have a way of getting a better handle on it and seeing how it might help our community directly as well as the county as a whole. So that was my report out on what has occurred since our last meeting. I encourage all our citizens to mark their calendar and do plan on attending the events. They have been very well received compared to when we did the Music in the Square in 2019. It's getting to almost the point of being standing room only. And it is a fun way to actually get a sense of community again going. And if you are virtually at home and you do have an after lunchtime that you want to just get away from the house and go somewhere, Wednesday afternoons, the atrium has excellent jazz that you can come and participate and just listen to. So I look forward to that, getting out of my house for a brief moment of time and getting some fresh air and getting some music into my life. So I do recommend that people mark their calendars and make it a priority to come out. All right, with that, we are on to our study session. And this evening, we have our third or fourth study session on the South Sound Housing Affordability Partners, or SHAPE. Based on our last study session, we had some questions and concerns about the interlocal agreement. So this evening we have John Howell and Executive Dan Meyer here to discuss the changes that have been made to the interlocal agreement, as well as to answer any last minute questions or anything that you as council member may have before we make our final decision, which is slated for September 20th, when we are all scheduled to be together again. So I hope everybody has read the interlocal agreement that was included with your study packet, and that you have made notes and have questions available, so that we can make this a productive final study session this evening. With that, I would ask either John Powell or Executive Dammeier for any opening comments and refreshers on what changes have been made in that interlocal agreement. So welcome this evening, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bellisi, members of the council. For the record, Bruce Dammeier, I have the privilege of serving the people of Pierce County as our county executive. And I'd like to ask John to kind of do a quick overview, just to get us back all up to speed on what it is and isn't, what changes have been made, and then we can answer any questions you might have. John?
Great. Thank you, Executive. John Howell with Cedar River Group. Nice to see you all again. I know we've been before you, 2 times. So we're happy to answer any questions. I'm not sure if for the staff listening in, if you are going to share the PowerPoint or you would like, there we go. Great, thank you very much. So I have just a couple of slides. We'll run through them pretty quickly, and then the executive will do a summary, and then both of us are happy to answer whatever questions you may have. So next slide, please. So I think you all know, I can't remember the timing of when we came before you versus when the steering committee of mayors and council members that has been guiding SHAPE now for over a year came to the conclusion that the A in South Sound Housing Affordability Partners really needs to stand for accessible, attainable, and affordable housing. And by that they mean SHAPE needs to be an effort that is providing a variety of housing types in a variety of locations for different income levels. The use of the word attainable is important. It's, yes, there's a need for more housing of people with the one end of the lower income spectrum, but given what's happened to housing affordability in most communities in Pierce County, there is a need for housing at the middle income levels that folks can afford. Next slide, please. So as the mayor said, we have an intergovernmental agreement. Number of jurisdictions have reviewed it and have provided comments. We incorporated many of those comments and now have what we are calling a final draft that is being reviewed and has now been approved by 7 governments thus far. Next slide, please. So one of the questions we always get asked is, what will SHAPE do? And this is this question we often answer in sort of a general way for a very specific reason. So SHAPE will provide specific staffing support for the unique needs of each of the members. So if a member comes to SHAPE and says, we're interested in doing an analysis of our regulations, see if we can speed up housing permitting, or we're interested in zoning policy, which may create more affordable housing, or we're interested in programs that we might be able to put in place to renovate housing so that seniors or first-time home buyers might be able to afford housing. So on the one hand, it is meant to provide staff technical support to each individual member. At the same time, there are going to be some policies, some programmatic ideas, which a number of cities, maybe even all cities, might be interested in. So it is meant to look at those ideas that multiple cities are interested in. And then lastly, something that the executive has talked with the group about a lot over the last year is to design and support some demonstration projects, whether that would be preservation of housing units or building of new housing units. Come up with some demonstrations that can put on the ground units that the members of SHAPE can understand how to do more of that kind of work. Next slide, please. So we often get asked about what role SHAPE will play, and we thought it's important to talk about the things that SHAPE will not do. So this is not a coalition that will have any land use authority. It doesn't take away any of the authority that local governments have to determine their land use regulations, their land use policies. We have designed this, and we've had a lot of conversation with this, the steering committee, about not duplicating work that others like PCRC and PSRC are doing. This has been designed by the steering committee so that it's not meant to be another, quote, layer of bureaucracy. It does not have the ability to add new regulations or add a program or policy that a local government doesn't want. And that's the last point here. SHAPE will not force any member, any city, town, county, or tribe to take any action that it is not endorsing and supportive of. Next slide, please. Totally voluntary. We call this a coalition of the willing. Next slide, please. And this slide is already a little out of date, but the cities and governments with their logos are the governments that are currently reviewing the intergovernmental and, like yourselves, holding study sessions or votes are soon to be scheduled. The cities or governments that have the green box around them are all of the governments that have endorsed SHAPE and their participation in SHAPE. And with one addition, the city of Fife has also now approved the intergovernmental and wants to be an initial member. Next slide, please. So where we are in this process, the intergovernmental has been sent to every government in the county. Many of the governments are either have already or are in the process of deliberating on that intergovernmental. We expect, this says final decisions made in July and early August. That's out of date. Should have corrected that, because we know you and one or two other cities will make their decisions in September. So we will have final decisions about all of the governments interested in joining in September. And we are, at the direction of the steering committee, there are enough governments that have said they want to join SHAPE that the steering committee has asked the county, which will become the administering entity, providing the administering support, to start the process of creating a job description and getting it advertised, so that once the SHAPE is created and executive board is created in September or early October, that hiring process can follow shortly on its heels. Next slide, please. So the contributions, I think we probably covered this in our last session, but the contributions for each of the governments are dependent on their population. The University Place annual contribution, the range is shown here, and the reason it's still a range is because it depends how many governments ultimately decide to participate. So the high end of the range assumes 10 governments participate, and the low end of the range assumes 14 governments participate. So that's the reason, and the annual dues from all of the members would go to support 1.5 FTE that would provide the kind of support and technical assistance that I described earlier. Next slide, please. Really quickly, what is it that University Place stands to gain by joining SHAPE? Well, a seat on the executive board, and that has been structured so that every member has one vote. There is no weighted voting. So University Place would have a voice in determining what it is SHAPE is going to work on. And I can tell you, based on the experience of the other regional collaborations that have been in place in King County, that annual work plan usually has something that every member city wants to accomplish with respect to affordable and attainable housing. University Place would get technical assistance and support from the staff who are knowledgeable and skilled in housing policy, housing preservation, housing development. So that it would be offered to all members. Would have a voice at all of the state and regional tables where housing decisions are made. One of the things we have learned over the last 2 years from legislators from Pierce County is the power of speaking with a unified voice on issues related to housing, and I'll let the executive speak more to that. University Place could participate in the sharing of ideas you may have shared with other cities, county, tribe, or other ideas coming your way that others are trying, or ideas that have been tried and are not working well. And finally, the opportunity to pool resources, both for staffing purposes and potentially for capital purposes, again, for renovating or building housing. Last slide, please. That's the end of my brief presentation. Mayor, I know I didn't talk a lot about changes to the intergovernmental, but I thought we could address those in whatever questions council members may have. Executive?
Thank you very much, John, for that summary. Just really quick, we started this about 2 years ago because all the mayors and I knew that housing affordability was one of the biggest threats to the quality of life of our community, that we had large numbers of our communities that were effectively being priced out of homes. I can remember when Mayor Penner of Ording told me that he became really concerned that people who worked for the city of Ording could no longer afford to live in the city of Ording. So we knew that we had to come together to effectively take this on, that we needed to do it in a way that everybody was involved in doing something. We all did not have to do the same thing, but we all have to focus on this. We can't do it as individual entities. That coming together and focusing our energy on it is the way that we're going to have a chance to make an impact, and that doing nothing is not a solution to this challenge. This is about advocacy. It's about smart policy. It's about kind of projects and solutions that will actually show results on the ground. There are 3 things that I think really differentiate SHAPE from a lot of other government organizations that we're all familiar with. The first is the fact that this is unlike the Puget Sound Regional Council. This is not weighted voting. University Place's vote is the exact same as the city of Tacoma's, exact same as Pierce County's vote. Just so that's important. We did that intentionally because we want all the voices at the table. The second thing is that this is intended to be action oriented, to be results. We need to show results. We need to be accountable for what we're doing here. And that's really a key part of what we've got going on. And part of the reason that is so important is we intentionally made it easy for people to exit. That if this is not delivering for a community, then like you, I don't want to be involved in any government program that is not delivering results for our community. So if SHAPE isn't showing value, if it's not delivering results, cities should be able to eject, and if enough of them eject, the thing will fail. And that's what should happen if it's not showing results that help our community move forward. So with that, I am look forward to having kind of discussions with you. I appreciate that. I'm glad that Mayor Belisi had the chance to hear Brian Schmidt at Cities and Towns. He has been our primary support for this. He's done a great job. I think we've got a good product here. We're ready to move forward and look forward to addressing any questions you might have. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Executive Dammeier, Mr. Howell. Seeing as how this is a study session and we all have some ideas and questions, I will use the raise hand option on this instead of going through the roll call vote. So with that, Councilmember McCluskey, you had a question or comment?
Thank you, Mayor Belisi. On the surface, this sounds like a great idea, a great program. I do believe in partnering with other local jurisdictions to make, that leverages not only our funds, but also our efforts in a collective way. We're part of a larger community other than University Place that we really need to puzzle into and figure out what they're doing, what are the best practices, how we can incorporate that. And being at the table in the very beginning, I think it's essential because we do have a housing action toolkit that we will probably use sooner than later, especially after we see some of the outcomes of COVID-19 and how that has impacted the renters, the coming into the homeowners, how they can maintain their mortgages throughout these changing times, and the government will need to give them some tools in order to sustain themselves, because I, for one, as a council member, would not like to see families and seniors being turned out of their homes that they have worked so hard to attain pre-COVID. And the other part is a question that I have is, you indicated that it wasn't going to be managed like the PCRC, which I get it. I understand the different dynamics that has been involved in that. As I see this as moving forward, as this could be a powerful board in regards to housing in each of the local jurisdictions. Because if you're not on the train, and the train is rather large, and whether you're on the board or not, you will be impacted by what's going on in the other jurisdictions if you're not part of this equation. So I think that component makes this a powerful tool, especially a voice to our state and maybe federal governments to hopefully get some additional resources and funding. So I see it also as there is components in the Growth Management Act with the countywide planning updates for the Vision 2050 that does allude to the fact that a group such as this could be massaged and grown. So I see that dovetailing into the housing component of that, as well as the draft regional housing strategy for 2021. So I see that as SHAPE being part of that picture and an entity piece to that. So I would certainly, as a council member in the city of UP, want to be part of that discussion and on that table. One of my concerns is that every jurisdiction has one vote, which I like. I like to be just as powerful as City of Tacoma and Pierce County. That's really good. I think that's value added for a city of our size and other smaller local jurisdictions as well, so that we're not moved by the larger entity's interests that may not align with ours. But as we go forward with this, and so we have a person sitting at the table. I was curious, is it going to be run like ECRC where we vote on that council level, but we don't mandate the city's action in any way? It has to still come back to the councils for the final approval and action. That's what I'm gathering. It didn't really spell that all out, but I don't want whoever sits on that executive board to any way leverage the city's funding or staff or in any way. It does need to come back to the cities and then back probably to shape out what sort of strategies and policies will evolve from that. And I'm hoping that whatever strategies and policies that we evolve out of that will not be a shall, but would be a should and highly recommended. So that was a concern that I had with anything that evolves in that. And it sounds like from what I'm gleaning from the PowerPoint presentations and some of the other things in the document that it's not going to take on that sort of authority, correct?
Absolutely, Councilmember McCluskey. This is a situation where the executive committee will come together and they will kind of focus on and help develop some policies and strategies and maybe even some projects. But whether a community adopts those policies or partners in a project is totally up to that jurisdiction. SHAPE has no authority to kind of bind or require any of the jurisdictions to do anything. Everything will go back to your council and they'll get to decide whether those policies or which of those policies might be right for a university place and which might not be. So you retain all the authority locally. John, you want to add anything?
I do. The other thing I would add, I'm going to twist the question just a little bit. The way that this has worked in the other places where it has been tried is that the cities go to the collaborative entity and say, we would like help pursuing an idea around preservation of units, more affordability for our seniors, accessory dwelling unit policies, help drafting the housing element of our new comp plan. So the cities have been more the driver saying, here's the help we want. And then the staff figures out how to provide that support to each of the members.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And the other concern that I have looking at the financial numbers and the staffing of 1.5, I don't see how that's going to be managed when all these jurisdictions come through and they want to get, for UP $12,000 to get a year annual consultant is pretty darn reasonable. So how much time do we get from that consultant if so many jurisdictions? Because I know I have several different housing concerns in University Place with the diversity of our housing stock that I think is sort of like we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg, and it's going to be a big monster to resolve just in our city. How much time do we get at the table with this consultant at the end of the day? Like if we come on with such a big hairy request, we could take up the bulk of that poor consultant's time.
So I can take a crack at answering that, Mr. Executive. Again, I keep talking about how other models have worked. The principle, I think, that is going to have to be agreed to is that in any given year, a staff as limited as 1.5 FTE is not going to be able to meet everybody's request. But over the course of 2 years, over the course of 3 years, every government that is a member of SHAPE needs to feel and expect, needs to feel as if they've received service and expect that they will receive service. So I can't say that everybody's needs get met in one individual year, but over 2 years and 3 years, all the members ought to feel as if they got something very valuable from the staff support that's available.
And the other thing I would just add very briefly is the key is being on the executive committee. And that's what we're talking about here, because then you're helping to create the work plan as well. You're talking about what are the policies that we want explored and, getting that on the work plan. So that's absolutely key as we go forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you. That's all my questions for now. Thank you for answering them. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember McCluskey. Councilmember Fleming.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to start with saying thank you to Executive Dan Meyer and to John for joining us tonight and really making yourselves available to answer the, I believe, will be a plethora of questions that we have, and just being patient through that process. I know this has been a long process, and I know it's a passion that the executive has. So I've got a series of questions that I'm trying to just get a better understanding of what this is all about. So bear with me on that. John, to some of the things you talked about, you mentioned, there were examples that you had given to what, in the examples you gave, I should say, into what the city would be able to benefit from by belonging to this organization. Those examples are things that we already do when it comes to technical planning and processes. So I was struggling to understand, if we're already doing that, what are we going to gain that's extra to what our staff currently does? And then the next comment or question was, you mentioned demonstration projects. And my question to myself is, why can't individual governments do that now with those demonstration projects? The term affordable housing is, I call it a ghostly term, because I learned during my tenure at the county, affordable housing means different things to different groups and different governments and entities. So if we are truly focused on the executive's vision there of making homes affordable, because if you look at the housing market in Pierce County just in the last 6 months, it's literally going through the ceiling. So what may be affordable to one entity would definitely be unaffordable to another. So has this group shape, have they defined what is going to be affordable for citizens? So it really has some meaning to it, not just a term that we throw out there because it feels good on there. So I'm curious on that response. In your slide, I know I'm throwing a lot of questions at you, so I hope you're catching them. But in your slide that showed cities that are participating, I noticed Pierce County, that's spearheading this project, didn't have their logo circled. So are they not a participant of a program that they're actually fostering? So I'm curious about that. You mentioned policies that the cities and towns would have an opportunity to thumbs up, thumbs down those proposed policies. But in my short time in government, I've learned that most policies that come from non-elected or elected bodies, usually that are higher up the food chain, come with stipulated dollars. So if you don't adopt the policy that's being presented to you, you're at risk of losing dollars that those cities and towns sometimes desperately need. So is that something that we could expect going forward? And that may be a premature question, I don't know, with that. And then lastly, I was really looking forward to hearing what are the new proposed changes in the proposal that I think that was actually mentioned earlier tonight, that's one of the things we were going to hear about. So I'm still curious as to what those changes are in the new documents that are being proposed. So I know that's a lot, but I appreciate your indulgence.
Thank you, Councilmember Fleming. I'm gonna work what I think were the first 4, and then let John Batt clean up with number 5. And I'll hope to go through these relatively briefly. First of all, I appreciate your question. So the first question was, why can't we do all this on our own? Why will we actually be better? What would be the value to University Place if we combine? And I would say I think there's going to be substantial value. Let me give you a couple of ideas of why I believe that. I will tell you, we've already started some joint advocacy down in Olympia, and I think that has kind of yielded some preliminary results. We had a little bit of impact on the kind of the housing policies that were coming out down there, just started to do that. But the more we work together, when we do a letter to the Pierce County delegation signed by all the participants in SHAPE, that gives us a much stronger voice in Olympia. And here's why that's important. First of all, a voice in the policy decisions. If we aren't at the table helping shape those decisions, folks up north are making those decisions and shaping that policy for us. So we need to be as effective as we can, and we are stronger together. I can tell you when I was down there, when the whole, the county would come together around an issue, it became really easy for the full Pierce County delegation to work together to achieve those goals. So when we talk about things like, maybe one of our advocacies is we really think the senior tax exemption needs to be moved up. We could adopt that as one of our kind of policies as a legislative priorities as SHAPE. The other issue in advocacy is Pierce County has historically participated very little in the Washington State's Housing Trust Fund. For the most part, all that money that the state sets aside into their trust fund, the vast majority of it, billions over years, has gone into King County. Why? Because we haven't had good projects that can take advantage of it, and we haven't been good advocating for it at Olympia. So that's the advocacy piece. In the policy piece, I think there's a lot of value in us coming together and talking about policies that could work in Pierce County. I'm envisioning that we'll can develop a list of, 8 to 10 policies that will be like a toolkit, and then each will be well vetted, and then each jurisdiction will say, you know what, I think policies 1, 4, and 8 really may make sense for University Place. And we would have a fully vetted policy that can kind of go into place there. So you'd see all that work in conjunction with other jurisdictions. You'd see it's not just your staff working in isolation, it's working in collaboration with the SHAPE staff. The final thing would be on projects. In that way, there's a lot of times right now when I think individually we can't afford some of these projects that we might be interested. Some of them, like as Mayor Belisi is probably keenly aware, one of my favorite things that we do in the county is our weatherization and minor home repair project. I think people when they think of affordable housing, they generally think of, well, that's going to be a massive 800-unit apartment complex. No, it can be many different things. I love the fact that we can go in with energy conservation and minor repairs, and for very little money, what averages about $14,000 per unit in our energy conservation program, we can help keep people in their homes in a much more energy efficient and save their heating budget for food and other things. So there's a lot of things like that we can do in terms of projects, and you will get to choose what projects you want to get into or don't get into with the monies that you have. In some cases, I'm envisioning, like right now, we've got some exploring projects where maybe Tacoma puts in some money, maybe Pierce County puts in some money, maybe Lakewood puts in some money, right? Because, and if you look at that, we have a lot of common borders, right? A project that might be right outside of University Place may be something that University Place says, that's a good project for us. It's going to help our community as well. We may want to be in. maybe at a smaller level than Lakewood, but that's okay. You get to choose that as we come together with monies and how we bring together. We've already identified there's a lot of different funding sources that already exist. When we talked about how recording fees at the beginning of the meeting, right? There's $1,406. There's community development block grant dollars. There's the home dollars. There's a lot of those different kind of monies that we have identified that many jurisdictions have some or all of. But if we look at opportunities to leverage them together, we can do more things. So that's the why it would be what UP could get from it by combining and collaborating. Affordability, we're primarily looking, and we need more and more types of housing, and we're looking at primarily kind of 100% of AMI and lower. So this is not, is it 30% of AMI? Yes. Is it 50% of AMI? Yes. Is it 100% of AMI? Yes. We need more housing, all types of housing for that entire spectrum. This is not, there's this perception among some that this might be, again, 800 unit subsidized housing affordable housing project. That's not what we're envisioning at all. It's got to be much more multifaceted than that. The next one that you asked about, Pierce County. Where's Pierce County? As you well know, Pierce County has a bit of a process. So you'd appreciate it today. Councilmember Fleming, the SHAPE interlocal government agreement advanced from the Community Development Committee with a due pass recommendation to the full council with a unanimous vote. It's going to come up on, gosh, I should know this. Do you remember? I should know this. We just did it. They just did it today. The 6th?
The final vote will be on the 24th.
Okay, 24th of August. Thank you for your help there. The last thing on policies where you might lose dollars, we don't envision that at all. It's a matter, you've got to choose to invest. We may be bringing some additional state dollars, but no one's going to, it's not like you're going to lose your $1,406 or your CDBG or your housing recording dollars. And in many cases, as Mayor Belisi pointed out, it's about your voice in how we use those dollars, even that are currently at the county level. So there's no loss of money. It's not, this is not your federal government that will, if you don't do what we want, we're going to take your money away from you. That's not what this is about at all. There's a lot of choice in what we're doing. And the last one, I think, was the changes to the interlocal governmental agreement. John, can you quickly highlight those for them?
Sure. Well, there is a document which Councilmember Fleming I've shared with your city attorney and would be happy to share with you or other council members that describes in about 3 pages the specific comments that were made by the different governments and how we did or did not respond. Most of them are pretty technical and dry and came from attorneys and et cetera. So as an example of that, we had quite a bit of back and forth between the attorneys from 3 jurisdictions about public records requests and how we wrote that up and who was responsible. So those attorneys got on the same page, and that's the language that's now in the intergovernmental agreement. We had some suggestion from the Lakewood Council that said maybe this intergovernmental ought to be approved by all of the member councils every 2 years. And the steering committee talked at some length about that and said, this process of getting an intergovernmental through and approved by all member governments is really time consuming and laborious. And at the same time, this shouldn't be an intergovernmental agreement that goes on without it ever being reviewed to determine, is it working? So the steering committee added language into the intergovernmental that says the executive board, at least every 5 years, and it could be more frequently, will review the intergovernmental agreement to determine, is it meeting its objectives? Is it working as it was intended? And if not, should changes be made to the intergovernmental agreement? So that was one of the changes. But there's 3 pages, and the vast majority of them are pretty technical and dry. But I am happy to share with you that document which we shared with your counsel, your legal counsel.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Keel.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Executive Denmeyer and John, for your report. The question I have, as you know, I was in the beginnings of these conversations, making out to Pure all up in the snow and it's come a long ways. I was very enthusiastic about what I heard when I was participating firsthand, and now with how it's come about, I do have some questions around the larger entities. I like the one city, one vote type of thing. I think that's excellent. When we talk about a city like Tacoma or the county, for example, when they need resources from this organization, these two staffers, I'm curious. Those 2 entities actually have like 4 or 5 times more staff to do this type of work than what the 2 staff are from this. So how does that work? I mean, you're part of it, but then they're doing work for you. I mean, is your larger staff gonna kick things to them? Why wouldn't your larger staff just continue to do their work and maybe even provide support to the to the SHAPE staff, because they've been doing it longer perhaps, and they got more resources and, all that kind of stuff like that. So, I mean, for us, we have no staff to do that, 0. I mean, few. I mean, most of our people are doing a lot of it. That's just one hat that they wear. And so having a SHAPE staff, albeit just 1.5, that's like, 1.5 more people than we have, right? And that we could. So for us, it's the other way. It seems like for a county and the city of Tacoma, maybe even Lakewood, it's a different way. So I'm curious, how would you guys use those staff?
So thank you very much, Councilmember Keel. Appreciate that question. And I think that the issue is, yes, for the county, we do have a reasonable number of people who are focused on this, but not every jurisdiction does. And that is exactly why we're coming together. We believe that providing coordinated support and smart policies in support of all of our jurisdictions is going to benefit the county as a whole. So again, this is the whole, even we could go it alone, but that's not the best way to move forward on this. And again, I don't expect that there may be, 10 policies, let's say, that we're considering that we think kind of might make sense. That doesn't mean that University Place or Pierce County is limited to those 10 policies. Those are 10 policies that we think have some application and could be well vetted and used through, at some point in the county. So you may be doing, you want 1, 3, and 8, but you're also going to do, B over here and do something else. The county may as well, but the fact that we're coming together, focusing on housing affordability as a matter of principle for this organization, that's what's going to enable us to really give it the attention, give it the time to move forward. So again, the county could go on, Tacoma could go on their own. Both of us are choosing, saying we're going to all be better off if we coordinate this to the greatest degree possible. Does that answer your question? And John, do you have anything you want to add?
I'd like to just add something, because I'm sort of the neutral observer, if you will, done a lot of the legwork. But when the steering committee members talk about this, Mayor Woodard's, Executive Danmeyer have been really clear that there is more of a value add to the smaller jurisdictions that don't have the kind of full-time housing staff capacity that they have, and that's okay with them. And they have said that explicitly in these conversations. That is okay with them. So this notion that, well, Tacoma is going to be fighting for a piece of the pie and Pierce County is going to be fighting for a piece of the staff pie, they may well want the staff to do some work that could benefit multiple jurisdictions, including them, but they're going to be okay with the idea of staff saying University Place this year needs some help with their housing element in their comp plan or this or that issue that they're bringing forward. That's okay.
See, and I think that's a key point, at least for me and maybe my colleagues in other small cities, because we do know that those two entities in particular have a lot of staff already doing this work, right? And if we're already in this, one of the concerns I've heard is that, well, gee, these large organizations are just going to get 2 more staff members and bring them over to their staff and continue to do, expand what they're doing already. Whereas what I heard before and what I think and I'm hoping I'm hearing now is no, the larger entities have their staff. They're going to continue to do their great work that they've done. And if anything, the large staff from those large agencies will come and augment the 2 that are in shape to actually move out recommendations and ideas out to the other smaller pieces. I think that's a nuance that needs to be brought out because it's easy to think it's going to all be sucked up into the vortex.
Executive, I can give a very specific example of this if it's okay. And the staff person that Mayor Belisi mentioned, she had heard the briefing from, and that Executive Dammeier mentioned, Brian Schmid. There's a staff group that has formed around the SHAPE steering committee. And the staff group, made up of all of the cities, tribes, county that are at the steering committee table, have been talking to Brian about the use of the county's American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA dollars that can be used for housing. And what Brian has said is it would be fabulous if we could get SHAPE talking about how could you use some of those county ARPA dollars in ways that would be beneficial for the member governments in SHAPE. What are the kinds of programmatic ideas for the use of those dollars that would have benefits to SHAPE communities, not just unincorporated county? And Brian is eager for that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's great. And not only these dollars, but other dollars that are pretending to come down, right? We use that same model going that way. And figuring out a way that we, as you said, Mr. Executive, to begin to leverage upstream, right, with the state and federal. I think that we've got some ways in between you and me, Mr. Executive. I think we can leverage the Association of Cities and Counties to help with this effort as well.
And Councilmember Keel, when you refer to the county as a sucking vortex, I'm sure you meant it in the best possible way.
The most best possible way.
Are you done? Are you done, Councilmember Keel?
I am for now. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. We are running a bit behind in our schedule, but I don't want to cut this conversation off. I'm just hoping that the remainder of the speakers with their questions will be brief and to the point, please. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington. You are muted, sir.
Thank you, Mayor Belisi. And brief and to the point, I'll try. So see what we can work out there. First off, Executive Dammeier, thank you very much for being here, helping us understand this, and John as well. The last time I recall we were engaged in this discussion, one of the things that we started having questions about had to do with how the executive committee was formed, how did it interact, what were its authorities. And I think this later draft or more complete document that is presented tonight, included in our packet, answers a lot of those questions. And so it becomes much more understandable about what its role is and how that interacts, and that if we pay the freight, so to speak, we have a seat at the table, literally in the case of the executive committee. So for me, at least, that answers a good deal of that question. I also just briefly will share that I have the good fortune of interacting with elected officials around this state in one capacity or another. And one of the most common things I hear is about housing affordability in the community and how can their kids continue to live there, or how can they get in the workforce there. It's everywhere. It is an issue that many of us face, and I think it's an economic issue for us as we grow economies. I think it's a family issue. It affects us in lots of ways. So in our community here, specific to University Place, later on tonight, we're going to talk about a survey that was taken. And in that survey, it was all about hazards and public safety. But the single largest word, which is to say the most frequent comment we had in a survey about hazards, had to do with homelessness. And now, housing affordability and homelessness are not exactly the same thing, but there is a relationship there. And it tells me our community also is keenly interested in this subject, like many others. If we can move our community forward in helping us get the tools, that's great. And it is, as, pardon the pun, as affordable as it appears to be, then all the better for all of us. As far as the county and the city of Tacoma's strategy of allowing the resources to be used a little bit more by other communities, it just makes good sense as well. You can either grow the slice, your slice of the pie, or you can grow the whole pie. And in this case, growing the whole pie, meaning the whole inventory of affordable housing and people working towards that goal, helps everybody out. And I can see how it makes sense. And all in all, I think that's something I'm willing to pitch in on as I look at this issue. But so, still thinking about it, of course, but in any case, thank you for being here. I don't have a particular question, just wanted to mention that the issues we had earlier, I think, are addressed, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember Figueroa, you had some quick comments or questions?
Yes.
Unmute yourself.
Okay. Executive Denmeyer, thank you for coming out and entertaining us. And John, thank you for your help in this. How will this organization work with the outside, meaning there are so many coalitions, nonprofits, non-governmental type of entities that also deal with affordable housing across the spectrum, whether it be homeless or not. And they also help shape policy. And so, and they also draw money. Matter of fact, they also are given money by government. So how will they be not at the table? Because when you have major players that are out there that are not part of city government, and they're not in this so-called executive committee, how does that work? Because it seems like we're excluding one of our body parts when it comes to affordable housing.
Do you want me to answer that, Executive?
Sure, you can go ahead and I'll back clean up on this one.
Okay.
If you leave anything for me.
Okay. So I would say that the steering committee agrees 100%, Councilmember Figueroa, with your comment. And so the way they have structured the creation of SHAPE is to include the creation of an advisory board, which would be advisory to the executive board, with all of the kinds of entities you just described: advocates, nonprofit housing developers, for-profit housing developers, folks who are knowledgeable in the community about housing issues. And that advisory board is written into the intergovernmental agreement as a fundamental structure. They're not a decision maker. That is left to the executive board, but they are advisory to the executive board.
How will that selection occur? And who gets to be, I guess if you're going to, it's like a commission, right? Getting commissioners to sit on a commission that advises the council. So who selects, is it by default the chair, or they get to pick who they send? I mean, that becomes very, I mean, to me, I'm very concerned about that because it's not as, you have some very, Councilmember McCluskey said it a couple of times, power players, you know. Some of the players out there that we're talking about as advisory are power players when it comes to affordable housing. And so, you know, we have to, I'm concerned about how that all gets mixed in. And if they're truly advisory, or are they pushing and using muscle to, because some of these organizations actually lobby up in the legislature. So anyway, that's where I'm, you know, trying to figure out how does that all going to work out.
So just
because it's politics, by the way. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I mean, you know, kumbaya, sure, it sounds great, but let's face it, there are personalities, there's different views of all sorts, agendas, and it's not kumbaya all the time.
Two quick things. The executive board will decide what process they want to use to recruit potential advisory board members, and then the advisory board will be the decision-making entity. It's not a chair's decision unless the board says they want the chair to do that, but the board will decide what the membership should be. And secondly, because of the sorts of conflict of interest issues you were just describing, the intergovernmental agreement includes language about conflict of interest from advisory board members and needing to adhere to state practice, policy, and law. So the steering committee talked a little bit about that, council member, and put that language in.
Okay, thank you.
Council.
The only thing I would add just briefly
is
when we were first meeting, and Councilmember Keel may remember this out in Puyallup, one of the things that we specifically did is we brought in these different groups to hear from them because their voices are so important in doing this. And it was so powerful that we codified it in terms of the advisory committee. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Fleming, you have the final question of the evening.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'll be quick with both here. One, John, to a point you made earlier about equity on the board, the executive board, that the chairmanship of that board, will that be always Pierce County or Tacoma, or does that get voted by the members and rotate to all the members of that executive committee?
Yes.
Okay, and my other question to the executive, Dan Meyer, just trying to get a last kind of a clear picture, your rationale or thinking of why create a quasi-governmental agency versus a task force of cities to address and accomplish the same goals.
So I think that the reason we did that is we thought it had to have more staying power and a little more clout than just a task force or a work group. You know, we were meeting as the roundtable of mayors, and this was their kind of recommendation coming out. And as we look around, particularly clout in Olympia, particularly the ability to work together a little bit more officially, you know, this interlocal governmental agreement is a pain in the butt for all of us, right? But it does give us a little more staying power as we go forward, as long as we are producing results. That's the key. We've got to be getting stuff done, having an impact. But that's why we chose to go this way. Thank you, Councilmember Fleming.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fleming, can I just follow up real quickly on your earlier set of questions? Would you like me to send you that 3-page document I described that said, here were all the comments received and here's how we amended the intergovernmental agreement, or your council can send that to you? Because I don't want to leave that unanswered.
I appreciate it. And if it could go to, I don't know how to get it to all the council members, but I'm sure they would have an equal interest in reviewing that. So thank you.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that Mr. Howell forward that to our city clerk, and she will then send it out to all council members. Also, since we are running behind on our schedule and we do need to cut the discussion while robust out, if there are questions, comments, or concerns that you have regarding this that can be directed to Mr. Howell or to the steering committee on this, I would recommend that you email Emmy, our city clerk, and she will then forward those questions on to Mr. Howell for answering to you. But we are going to be putting this up for a vote to council on our meeting of September 20th. So please think about this in the meantime. If you do have questions or comments that weren't answered this evening or are not provided in any of the previous documents that you have received regarding the subject matter, please do email Emmy and she will forward it on to Mr. Howell to get your response before our meeting. I am looking forward to seeing what our council decides on the 20th when the meeting comes. I can see this as being a valuable asset to not only University Place, but to the county as a whole, in being able to come up with some creative ideas that we have not really had an opportunity to think about on a council level or even on a staff level, just do it because of the routine work that we have to do. And addressing affordability, attainability, and coming up with some creative projects takes some time and takes some effort and expertise that I'm hoping this SHAPE group can get from the staffing that will be provided. We have long kicked this can down the road, and we look at our regulations and we are all vetted into our regulations personally. And to make changes to those sometimes can take a lot of time and effort, but maybe with a SHAPE representative that can look at all the jurisdictions that are involved in this group and be able to glean some positive items out of it, to be able to make changes on a county-wide basis that will attract those developments coming in and will attract the money that will support those developments to take a foothold, I think will benefit us all greatly. The last thing we want is for our lower wage income workers in University Place to have to travel to Thurston County in order to obtain housing. If they at least stay within Pierce County and we can find affordable housing that's within easy driving and accessible driving, we've achieved something. And to be able to keep our community, the housing stock that we do have, to be able to keep it maintained so that it is affordable for the first-time home buyer coming into the community is an asset to all communities, but in particular to University Place. So I'm looking forward to the executive group being able to glean our list of concerns and be able to figure out what the top 5 or 6 concerns are for all the jurisdictions and then start working at addressing those issues. And I think that's what SHAPE will do for us as a community. So I thank you, Executive Dan Meyer, for taking some time out of your busy schedules this evening to once again come before us. And Mr. Howell, thank you for also being available to answer questions tonight. So again, reminder, council, if you do have questions, please do email them. And I know Mr. Howell and even Executive Dan Meyer will be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I just want you to know I'm doing my part for University Place. My family increased your population by 2.5 years ago when my third granddaughter was born, Maggie, and she lives just off 54th of Bridgeport. So,
Oh, well,
there you
thank
go.
you, Meyer. Very good. Well, thank you again, gentlemen. Okay, council, our next item on the agenda is our 2021-22 biennial budget carry forward and mid-biennium adjustment. And hopefully you have all read your material so that we can maybe make up some lost time from our from this last segment of our agenda. Otherwise, we're going to have an extremely late evening. Just giving you a cautionary note here. So with that, I'll get our Leslie Blaisdell to come on and provide the staff report for this.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm Leslie Blaisdell, Finance Director. So for tonight's study session, we are looking at the 21-22 biennial budget adjustment. And due to the wait for finding out what our ARPA funding would be, as well as council scheduling delays, we're combining the carry forward adjustment, which normally occurs in June, with our mid-biennial budget adjustment, which occurs in the fall of odd years, the midpoint of the adopted biennial budget. So I'll start with our carry forward adjustments. These recognize the carry forward of funding from the 2020 budget for reappropriation in 2021. It's comprised primarily of beginning fund balance adjustments, capital improvement projects, internal service fund carry forwards, and some new and continuing grant funding. The most significant changes, which is typical of a carry forward adjustment, are in our restricted and CIP funds. Those appropriations for capital improvements are continuing in nature, and they don't lapse at the end of the year. We typically budget those all in the first year of the biennium or in a prior year, and what isn't spent on those projects gets carried forward to the next year as the project continues. In Public Works, we're carrying forward $11.3 million in projects. In the Park CIP fund, we're carrying forward the Chambers Creek Trail project, and we're removing the budgeted amount for the current playground project, as that was one of the grants we applied for that we did not receive. So we've pulled that out of our budget figures. We also proposed carrying forward $959,000 in the internal service funds. That's mostly reflective of IT replacements and projects that did not get completed in 2020. There are some other expenditure carry forwards. For instance, our UPTV capital restricted monies. That's monies we've collected that weren't spent, but they are restricted for that purpose. So we just carry that forward until a use is decided on for that. We've increased our contingency. We always budget 2% of our operating budget as a contingency fund for any surprises that come along during the year. So that is being increased to $301,000 for the year. We have also had some carry forward requests from community development for books, professional and consulting services that were pushed from 2020 to 2021. The most significant of that is $60,000 related to the Housing Action Plan grant. So that is money that's carrying forward. City Clerk is carrying forward some codification dollars, human resources, consulting services dollars that weren't spent in 2020. And then the remainder is in the street fund for in the street lighting and pavement maintenance for items to be carried forward. We then move to the mid-biennial budget adjustment. So this, we've recognized adjustments to revenues based on updated estimates for various revenue sources, including our state shared revenues. Each year, MRSC provides a state shared revenue calculator that we use to help us determine what those amounts will be per year. We also reviewed other revenues for adjustments, and I've listed in the packet the significant revenue adjustments that are included in this. We've increased sales tax. We saw a nice increase in sales tax coming out of during the pandemic from people ordering things online. So we have increased that in 21 and 22, but in the forecast, I have reduced that back as we await to see what happens in the future on that. That also increased our park sales tax. We continue to see decreases in our tax receipts for cellular utility tax. So we have reduced that in this biennium, and we continue to monitor it. We increased refuse, water, and electric franchise fees, our projections, and we've seen quite a large reduction to our investment interest, and that is a pandemic-related effect. So we're hoping that comes back up. We have started to see that tick back up ever so slightly in the last month or two, but nothing significant yet. This budget includes the addition of the ARPA funding, which is $4.7 million in 2021, and then the other $4.7 in 2022. The state shared revenue calculations are projecting a continued reduced fuel tax, so we reduced those projections in 2022. And currently our real estate excise tax is coming in higher and has been for the last several years. So we've increased those projections in this biennium. Gambling tax is ticking back up. So we've increased that to match. I tend to do about a 3-year average to determine where those are going to be. So we've increased those $30,000. Criminal justice sales taxes are coming in higher. The police fund received some one-time state city assistance monies that we've included in the budget, and we received the NPDES grant of $50,000 and the Leech Creek sewer grant for $2.1 million that we've included in the adjustment. The remaining revenue adjustments are interfund transfers related to the CIP projects and adjustments to beginning fund balances. On the expenditure side, we've made some significant adjustments to salary and benefits because we've had quite a few changes since we adopted the budget in staffing due to staff leaving, retirements, and some department reorganization. So to get up-to-date salary and benefit amounts, we ran a total new scenario of payroll position control document to update those projections. Other changes affecting salary and benefits is that our original estimate for cost of living adjustments in the adjusted budget was 3% for 2022, but the 2021 June CPI increased by 5.5%. And our union contract requires that we use the June CPIU or 3.5%, whichever is less. So we have included that additional 0.5% in our projections for salaries. Additionally, we included amounts for any sick leave or vacation payouts for the employees separating service. And in July, the employer PERS retirement contribution percentage decreased from 12.97% to 10.25%. So that was also included in the scenario. So it was a major redo of that document, but we included everything that has happened since we originally adopted the budget. These adjustments in total resulted in an increase in 2021 of $63,000 and in 2022, $148,000. We have included the salary range document in this packet that has the 2022 ranges updated to reflect that 3.5% COLA amount rather than the 3%. There were some other expenditure adjustments we included. 3 adjustments that were expenditures approved by council earlier this year that we just need to officially appropriate. The contribution to the Veterans Memorial Project, the court cost increases for the new contract that was approved in March, and the Suite A tenant improvements that were approved by council on June 21st. We have some CIP adjustments. In the Public Works CIP, we've included the Public Works shop equipment shed to be funded with real estate excise tax. Most of our large equipment is parked outside, and that is causing them to deteriorate a little quicker. And it's a project that's been on our list for a while, and felt this was a good time to get that in there. We also have the Grandview Drive overlay project, which is grant funded with our city match coming from surface water management funds and real estate excise tax. And on the park side, we have an increase to the Circ park improvements. That is the grant funded project, which was applied for over a year ago. And as you know, since in the last year, costs have increased. And so the new estimates show that that project will cost approximately $130,000 more than the original estimate. So we have built that in to be funded with parks impact fees and real estate excise tax. Some other adjustments in the community development department. There's some consulting fees for the Northeast Business District Planning Sub-Area Plan consulting. Some additional monies for street lighting and replacement poles. We've had quite a few run over by drivers this year. And some abatement funds. We increased credit card processing fees in animal control. As you know, we went to online licensing, so those are all paid with credit cards, so those fees have increased. So, and then we had some increased premium costs and risk management for new assets that were added from all the work that we've done. We also did some, I like to call them fiscally responsible baseline changes. We elected to restore our $4 million reserved ending fund balance earlier than planned. That's $1.8 million, and we're restoring that to the full $4 million. We are also increasing the strategic reserve to the 15% of our operating budget. This has been scheduled out in our forecast over a number of years, and we felt that we could do it now, get it to 15, and then keep it at 15 in the outgoing years. And then we also are looking to do an early payoff of our one remaining Public Works Trust Fund loan. Again, this was scheduled in our forecast, and we're just doing it all. We're hoping to do it all this year if this is approved. That takes care of some debt, but doesn't really affect our forecast any in the long run. So with all of those changes, we have updated the financial forecast, and all of our existing services, legal and contractual, can be met with existing revenues through the biennium and through our 10-year forecast period. We have 2 public hearings scheduled for this adjustment on September 7th and September 20th, and it will come to council for discussion and approval on September 20th. So in the end, our financial position overall, as reflected, has not materially changed. We've actually seen some increase. So I'm happy to take any questions, and I hope I kept that quick enough.
Thank you very much. With that, I see Councilmember Keel, you have raised your hand. I hope you have a brief comment or question.
Great, thank you. And Leslie, thank you for your report and congratulations again. I heard the report from the auditors that we had no findings, I mean, they were like, yeah, it was nothing, which is normal, but it was like, it was special. It was a special kind of nothing. So whatever that is in your, accounting terms, very nice job to you and your staff, and we certainly appreciate all the work you've done. It's clear to me that just listening to your report and how detailed it is, that you certainly have your hands on all of the things that are going on, and I know I appreciate, and I believe my fellow council members appreciate it as well. So very, very nice. The question is more of a comment. I've heard about these, we talk a lot about, cell phone utility and how how it's decreasing, and then we've got a couple of cell phone companies in our city, and then we also have a lot of grocers that sell these cell phone cards and stuff like that. And every year I hear that number, the sales tax on that is decreasing. I heard it again today, and I'm thinking, that just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, every person's got their face buried in their cell phone, all the time, and I'm wondering if anyway, I've talked about it before, and I'm just wondering if it's time that we actually did an audit, on the cell phone companies in our city, both as well as the grocers that sell it, right? Just an audit. I mean, we get audited all the time. I mean, it's not something that's not out of the ordinary. I mean, I'm willing to, take that, and then maybe one other thing, and I don't know if it's gambling, or something else, but just one or two things that we just focus and do an audit on.
I agree, and I am in discussions right now with a company to do an audit. I actually have been working with them for the last few weeks trying to get a proposal, and they should be sending over their final proposal by the end of this week, and we're hoping to do a utility tax audit. One nice thing, our code has a 5-year look back period, which is a little bit stronger than some others. So we'll have to pay for the audit, of course, but they'll be able to go back 5 years in their process and hopefully recoup some monies. There is, most of the cell phone companies have been decreasing their plan rates, so you can get 3 or 4 phones for a much smaller fee. So that has contributed to the decrease in cell phone revenues. They're all trying to stay competitive and beat out the other providers. But they're in discussions with the audit firm. There are some of the larger companies that have been underreporting in other entities, and so we're going to take a look at that as part of the audit.
Okay. And when you say utilities, can you give me the list? Is it the phones and what else?
This would be telephone, landlines, and cellular lines for those, telecom utilities, which are the two that we've seen the biggest decrease in.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mayor. You're on mute, Mayor.
Councilmember Fleming, you're up. You have a brief comment or question?
Just a quick one. Leslie, thank you again for a great report. So much appreciated. You mentioned that the ongoing damage to the light poles. As I recall from my vague memory here, those things aren't cheap to replace. Do we ever go after whoever the perpetrator might be to recover the cost for the city to replace those that are damaged?
We do, and we do collect a fair amount from those when they're for insured drivers. For some reason, I think that those poles have magnets that just attract the uninsured drivers. There's something about them, and so those take a little longer. We have, in the last couple of years, we added those poles to our insurance. So when they're struck by an uninsured driver, we turn them over to our insurance, and they attempt to collect or pay. When they are insured, it takes a little time, but we usually get that reimbursement from the insurance company.
Okay, Councilmember McCluskey.
Thank you, Mayor Belisi, and once again, Ms. Blaisdell, thank you on your great audit outcome. It's much appreciated, and hopefully that will reflect in other state fees. Maybe they won't charge us as much because you did such an awesome job, right?
I wish.
Yeah, I wish too. They're getting higher and higher in their price tag. But anyway, we have to pay it. I was having just a curiosity question with the ARPA funds that we're getting. Could some of those funds be used if we were to go into the SHAPE?
I would have to check on that specifically. I know there's a presentation later tonight about ARPA. Eric might have some idea, but I would have to look into how that there's pages and pages of rules and regulations of how we can use it, but we can certainly look at that.
Because, affordable housing, protecting rent, or, I'm just thinking that maybe that could dovetail to leverage some of those funds, since we're going to be talking about how we're going to spend that money. Also, you had an indicator for the variable message sign for 18K plus. That's going to be carried forward, and that is for the reader board we've been discussing as a council, correct?
This is for it's a toe-mounted variable message sign. It's used for road projects. We did use it for the COVID vaccines when we had them over at the Windmill Village. It's not a stationary reader board sign. This is through Public Works. It's a towable unit that can be used for road projects and announcements of the sort.
Okay, because it is it was a pretty cheap price tag for that, and so I had in my last meeting with our city manager, Mr. Sugg, I was mentioning a variable reader board sign, and his price tag was a little bit higher than that.
Yeah, this one's a towable unit.
But I'm interested in bringing that discussion to the council as well. I think we sorely need something like that. Okay, and then the credit card processing fees, that's the price tag to the city. That's not a carry through or pass through to the consumer.
No,
it's not gone to that. So we pick up the cost of that.
It's our fees with the processing company. It's just under 3% typically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it ranges what about $5,000 a year? Is that
that's what we're projecting. This is the first year that we're doing the online licensing, so we don't have a lot of history on how many are going to be done that way, but that's our projection.
Okay. If there's other credit card used in other city expenses, are we picking up the cost of the credit card fees as well?
Yes.
Okay, I like to know what the total cost of that is.
Yeah, we can annually get that. And those are also costs that we look at when we're looking at our fee schedule. If we're looking at increasing fees, that would be calculated in when we do a fee study.
Okay, that's good to know too. All right, thank you. Okay, and then I just liked in this you can't answer right away, but I'm always curious in the last, I think, at least 3 to 4 years about the pet licensing is how we are tracking and ensuring more pets are being licensed than not. And in our relationship with Pierce County, and just every time we meet, we talk about that, when we do our finance reports. And so just like to get a better handle on it and get that resolved prior to going into 2021.
Okay.
All right. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, just a quick comment. Leslie, I want to thank you and your team for the great job you do. It's really appreciated by our citizens and by the council. Thank you.
That was it?
That's it.
Wow. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, do you have any final comments?
Thank you, Mayor Belisi. And yes, it's pro tem time here. So as we move from one pro tem to the next, but also, Leslie, we've several of us have made comments. I'm sure the whole council agrees that we had a very good audit. It was exceptional in that there was no comments of any kind, and that is very unusual, and just speaks to a sparkling process, really, that is as clean as it can be. So thank you for doing that, and thank you, team, for doing that as well. I did have, with regards to the budget adjustments, budget carryovers, and the rest, to the extent that we have new capital items, these are capital items that the council hasn't considered already. It would be helpful to get more information about them, and I'm not saying we needed more information tonight. I'm just saying in the process to have some more information. So if we haven't already said, please go build that thing, then I'd like an opportunity to understand what that thing is and why we should build it. There are other things that we have adjusted here because the prices have increased, but we've already said, let's go do this. Now the prices are up. Okay, if that seems within reason, we can make that decision. So, but okay, great. Well, thank you. Just wanted to add that thought, but the rest of it looks very good. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
And as we close, I would also like to echo my fellow council members in congratulating your fiscal team on a superb audit yet again. Our citizens are well served with our financial department, and so please do pass on our congratulations to your staff.
Thank you.
And again, council, this will be up for public hearing at our next two meetings with a final decision on September 20th. So if you do come across any questions or concerns, please do forward them on to Ms. Blaisdell so she can answer those in our public hearing as we move forward on this. So thank you again, Ms. Blaisdell. Our next item on the agenda is a hazard mitigation plan, and for that I'd like to ask Lisa Patorik to come on screen. And hopefully you have all read the 208 pages of the document.
Right, yes. And if I could ask Amanda if you could please put up the slide presentation. Thank you. So we've managed to get, good evening, Madam Mayor and the rest of council, good evening. We've managed to get 208 pages of a FEMA document down to about 6 slides. So we'll see how this goes. All right, next slide, please.
So much for reading the 208.
Yes. So hazard mitigation is really, really important across the board within a community. The purpose of hazard mitigation, one, is to protect life and property. It's also in place to ensure continuity of operations. It establishes and strengthens partnerships in a region. Hazard mitigation is there to protect and restore natural resources, increase public preparedness, which is a key component, and also promote economic sustainability. Next slide, please. The hazard mitigation plan itself, hazard mitigation has been around for a very long time. And
excuse me for interrupting, but I'm not seeing the document on my screen. I see it down below, but I don't see it up on my screen. Now I do. Thank you. Excellent.
Great. So the idea of hazard mitigation, while not formally adopted until the late 1990s as a plan itself, it does have its roots in the National Flood Insurance Act of 1968. And you'll see on the left-hand portion of your slide the main regulations and guidance that oversees hazard mitigation and the hazard mitigation plan. What ended up occurring in the late 1990s is the thought that Congress would provide funding to communities to mitigate emergencies and hazards before they actually occurred. And so in 1997, there was a project called Project Implicit. And this was where communities got together and created lists of projects that could be worked on before something negative affected them to help mitigate the actions. So this really came out of the late 90s, and then the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000 really heightened the necessity of hazard mitigation plans. So just to provide a very brief overview, the Stafford Act, which is the first bullet that you see here, that constitutes the statutory authority for most federal disaster response activities, especially as they pertain to FEMA and FEMA programs. And a key component of this is federal funding. And so entities that have a hazard mitigation plan in place that's adopted by their governing body then become eligible to apply for and receive various grants. And I've highlighted about 6 on the right-hand side. All of these grants either require an adopted plan be in place prior to actually applying for federal funding, or have one in place before receiving it. And I'm not going to go through each of the grants. I'm just going to highlight the ones that are most important to a community like University Place. The first one is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. This provides funding to state, local, tribal, and territorial governments so they can rebuild in a way that reduces or mitigates future disaster losses in the community. So this grant funding is available usually after a presidentially declared disaster. And so this is really important in pre-disaster planning. The next, perhaps most important grant of all is what's called the Public Assistance Grant. The Public Assistance Grant Program helps, again, local governments and certain types of private and nonprofit organizations respond to and recover from major disasters or emergencies. So this type of funding, think of it as like during disaster dollars or after disaster dollars. So if there's an earthquake, for example, we could apply for grants which could be used for the cost of debris removal. We could use it for other life-saving emergency measures and also for restoring of public infrastructure. And then the final grant that is important to communities such as ours would be the Building Resilience Infrastructure and Communities Grant, so otherwise known as BRIC. It supports local communities to undertake hazard mitigation projects. Again, the point is to reduce the risks that communities would face from disaster and natural hazards. Next slide, please. So the hazard mitigation process, it's one that requires the cooperation and coordination of a variety of partners. The main partners involved in a hazard mitigation plan, obviously the city, because it is our plan. Pierce County, we are an appendix, our 208 pages is an appendix to the larger Region 5 Pierce County Hazard Mitigation Plan. They also provide technical expertise in helping us to develop the hazard mitigation plan. The third partner is the Emergency Management Division through the state, in addition to FEMA. So this is really a FEMA document in the sense that there are many FEMA requirements that must be included in the document. The nice thing about that is you could pretty much look at a hazard mitigation plan from across the country, and in terms of format and organization, they're all done in much the same manner. Next slide, please. So the hazard mitigation planning process really began in 2019 for this most recent edition. We were part of a regional planning team that met with the various partners discussed above in the last slide, but also included other regional partners. There were a total of 45 meetings that also included drop-in planning workshops and also more regionally specific areas. And so there were meetings that were held with the City of University Place and our neighbors, so Lakewood, and partners like the school districts, various school districts in our area, hospitals attended, various utilities attended, like the water district, and agencies like that. So these meetings occurred over the course of a year from February 2019 through January 2020. In May, you may recall that we did come before council in 2019 just to provide an update of what the hazard mitigation plan process was how that was going and what it was going to look like. And we foreshadowed some events that we were planning for later that summer. In the summer and fall of 2019, we in coordination with National Night Out, we held a public outreach in the atrium. Some of you may remember we had members from Pierce County Emergency Management. We had a display board with the various hazard maps of the city and invited residents who attended that evening to review portions of the plan and really go over some things that they would like to see and discuss the various hazards in the area. And we also put out a flash vote emergency preparedness survey to gauge information from the city. So that was done in the summer and fall of 2019. Then what ended up happening was the pandemic. And so we paused all of our work that was being done on the hazard mitigation plan and focused on the real world emergency that was happening at that time. And that has consumed a majority of our 2020 focus. So it was really interesting to see how hazard mitigation planning really can come together with real world emergencies that are occurring, and the benefit of planning beforehand for some of those emergencies. And then as things seemed to quiet down a little bit in the spring, we refocused back on the hazard mitigation plan, and the plan, as required, was submitted to both the State Emergency Management Department and FEMA to review, and they provided their preliminary approval. They had no questions on our document. They had no edits for our document. So they have provided their preliminary approval, and now it's back to council for your review and hopeful potential adoption next month with a resolution. Once that occurs, if that occurs, then the plan will be sent back to the state and FEMA with a resolution if it's adopted for their records. And then this is a living document. So the hazard mitigation plan is reviewed on a 5-year calendar basis. So what we'll end up doing is, slated later this fall, around November, we're going to go back and start revisiting the plan and start thinking of things that we can add and update for the next go around. The next adoption process will take place in November of 2025. So the plan will need to be reviewed, updated, and adopted again and walk through the same process in another few years. Next slide, please. So now we're getting into the actual organization of the document itself. And please note, the most commonly anticipated hazards are considered. And while most of the hazards are considered, this is not an all-encompassing listing of every single event that could face the city, its residents, and its businesses. So, as I said earlier, as it's a living document, as the city faces hazardous events and learns from those situations, learns from the experiences of other governments, the plan can always be changed and improved upon in future iterations. So the document itself is divided into 7 sections. The first section discusses the document and process itself, and it covers a lot of what was discussed in the timeline. The city's process for bringing in the public, the city's process for meeting with subject matter experts, the process of reviewing other technical documents to add hazards to its own plan. The next section is the jurisdictional profile. This is the only non-formulaic section of the entire document. And so this is where entities try to make their specific locality shine, right? So we tried to focus on the things that made University Place unique and tried to provide some of the personality about what makes University Place special. So you'll find that information in there. We went so far as to go back to previous mitigation plans and talk about the Fraser Glacier period, which, you know, talked about the formation of the topography of the area. So very unique section for the city. The next section is the capability identification section. It's made up of 2 components. First is an inventory of the community's mission, programs, and policies related to mitigation. And the second component of that section is the capacity of the government to carry out those programs. The next section is the risk assessment. And this is where the vulnerabilities of University Place in relation to hazards are reviewed. So we look at the consequences of the various impacts that the city could experience. So we look at things like geological impacts, meteorological impacts, technical impacts. GIS maps were created in partnership with the county to show various hazardous areas based on the items that were mentioned before. Examples would be like landslide areas, areas of liquefaction, tsunamis, flooding, things like that. So that is what's provided in a risk assessment. The mitigation strategy is probably the most important piece of the document. It's actually the blueprint for reducing potential losses based on the policies and programs and resources that a government agency has in place. So when you're looking at the mitigation strategy, we're looking at what an agency can do before an emergency to limit risk to lives or limit damage to infrastructure, damage to economic sustainability, and damage to other natural resources. The mitigating factors, they can be very expensive and complex projects to very cost-effective and very cheap things that folks can implement to manage risk. Some mitigation strategies could include projects related to seismic evaluations and structural and non-structural retrofits to some things that are simpler to do, like tree maintenance. So a whole host of mitigation strategies can be considered under this section of the plan. Finally, we have infrastructure and maintenance. Infrastructure, that determines the critical infrastructure buildings within a geographical area, and it looks at those vulnerabilities. Some things that could be considered a critical infrastructure would be like City Hall, a police station, a fire station, maybe if there's if there's like a trauma hospital in the area, you would then look at those critical infrastructures and review those vulnerabilities and try to mitigate some of those issues before they become a disaster. And then finally, the maintenance of the plan. I touched on that earlier. That goes back to reviewing the plan document every 5 years. Looking at what other agencies have done, what they faced, ideas from our own community to make this plan better. And as projects come off of the plan, as we attempt to apply for and hopefully receive grant funding, other projects would come on. Next slide, please. So in closing, just the hazard mitigation plan is a living document that lays the foundation for planning. It's one of many emergency management plans in place. The key with the hazard mitigation plan is it is a necessary document to have in order to, in some cases, apply for, but in all cases, receive federal funding during and after an emergency. And with that, I'll conclude the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Potoric. At this time, are there any council members that have any questions regarding this presentation? If so, please raise your hand. Okay, Councilmember Keel, do you have a quick question?
I do. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Lisa, for your report. Very informative. The question I have is around broadband. You know, with communications, and I know communications is a key part of federal, government, state and local government. We have the 900 megahertz radios and all those kind of things like that around emergencies. I'm wondering, is broadband or some kind of communications an important part of, say, like for the citizens, for the cities, or is that something that we should be looking at? Could we look at it? Is it something we could add to? You know what I mean?
Yes, communications is consistently a concern that comes up in every single exercise, after action report, actual disaster. So yes, it should always be at the forefront of planning in terms of broadband. While not explicitly called out in a hazard mitigation plan, we do talk about communications, and we can, apply for grant funding in those situations. But you're right, communications is one of the most important things that needs to be in place during an emergency and after. So
follow-on question, I think you almost answered it. If we as a city decided to apply for some broadband, say there's broadband money somewhere else, and we want to fly that under our emergency management type deal to kind of give it some more oomph, and maybe some more points or dollars or something like that. Is it possible or plausible to tie those two together?
Yes. Short answer is yes. So I do recall when we were in the planning process, it was one of the topics that we were talking about in one of the numerous 45 meetings that were held. And as for the federal grants that are available for hazard mitigation and public assistance, we can, it depends on how successful we are in our grant application writing, but we definitely can apply for things to help bolster the communication within the community.
Yeah, and I'm going to push it a little bit more, and I think you heard me though. So it's not only communications within the city, amongst the cities, our trucks and stuff, but I'm talking about the citizen, Mom and Joe at home, wondering if their kids made it from school or not. Can they call and communicate and, stuff like that?
Yes, bolstering the broadband with hopefully less communication failure when, the thing that comes to mind is, in the earthquakes and tsunamis, everybody immediately starts texting and calling, and yes, those can be bolstered, and we can definitely apply for funding to ask for that.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, I see Councilmember McCluskey, you have your hand raised, but I'm assuming it's from our last presentation, or did you have a question?
Well, I didn't have my hand raised, but since you called on me, I do have, I think I'll talk. Thank you.
Can we please make it brief? We do have a couple more items,
Yes.
and otherwise we're here till midnight.
Oh, I would love to be here till midnight. My question is there a mention of LAHAR in the hazard mitigation? There is? Okay. Because I've seen tsunami, and is that considered the same thing?
No, they're slightly different. LAHAR is that volcanic debris that could come down from the mountain if Mount Rainier were to hopefully not explode in our lifetime. It's slightly different from a tsunami. Now, viewing the LAHAR maps, University Place is actually not in the LAHAR threat zone. So our plan, as it relates to LAHAR, is more of a receiving city. So looking at sheltering folks from the Fife Valley, the Ording Valley, the Puyallup Valley, all the way down towards the Port of Tacoma. So that's how our plan looks at the LAHAR situation. Very different from what the Puyallup plan has, because they're in the pathway of a LAHAR.
All right. Okay, so we'll be the receiving city, and hopefully we'll get federal and state support as that occurs, so we can manage that. Yeah, thank you.
Are there any other questions of Ms. Patoric at this time? Okay, not seeing any. I want to thank you for your presentation tonight, and I hope the rest of the council will read the 208-page report and become familiar with the mitigation plans for University Place. So we're on to our next item, which is our police survey, and I'm going to ask our chief, Greg Primo, to come on screen, along with Ian Stewart, I see.
Yeah. Good evening, Mayor, council members. Hopefully you can hear me. Thumbs up. All right, great. Tonight I'm here to brief you quickly on our community survey on public safety. If you recall, back in January of 2020, At your council retreat, we had a rather lengthy discussion and presentation around public safety. And at the conclusion of that retreat, there was direction from council to staff to research and get the feedback from the community on their support for funding additional public safety staffing here in University Place. So we got on that right away in February, started with a community public safety forum that was in person, remember way back when, where we had over 50 citizens in attendance down here in the gallery. And then in March, we started some communications, one with EMC Research, and also a consultant who's worked with local jurisdictions on some tax levy measures for local jurisdictions as well as park districts and whatnot. Of course, in late March, COVID hit, and so a lot of our research and communication around that survey idea kind of got tabled as we addressed a more pressing matter here locally in terms of the COVID stuff. But we still continued our community outreach. We still conducted 2 community academies virtually here from the PD. Also, I did a social justice related community talk virtually with some of our residents. So we still kind of continued the message about what public safety is here in University Place with our citizens. Here recently in May, we started as kind of COVID started to slow down, knock on wood, we got the conversation back going about the survey, reached back out to EMC Research to talk with them. It's about getting an actual survey completed for the citizens of University Place. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Ian Stewart from EMC Research to provide you with some more information about who they are and how they conduct their surveys and how that's going to benefit University Place.
Thank you, Greg. Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Stewart. I'm principal with EMC Research. I have been with the company since 1999, which is now 22 years. The company was started in 1989. I want to give you a brief background on us. I'll do it quickly, and then I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. I did prepare a brief PowerPoint slide, which I will begin sharing now. You can see my overfull desktop instead. Hold on. Okay. So, like I mentioned, we have been in business since 1989. We do public opinion research. That's all we do. We started at the same time in Seattle and in Berkeley. We now have 50 people across the country. And we've done decades of research on civic issues here in the Northwest, as you can imagine, starting in Seattle. We do specific questionnaires to every client. So people come to us with issues or questions and say, we have things we want to know. We help write a questionnaire and then get approval for that to put it into the field that gives you back results on the questions you want to understand. So we've already gone through a bit of this process with the city here and city staff to figure out how to do this. And then later on, we consult on the results to help you figure out what to do about them. I've been listening to you all night. A number of the other entities here are also our clients. So Sound Transit we worked with since I started here in 1999. But here are some of the other clients that are familiar to you. Very similar kinds of surveys in Renton and Redmond. We did citizen surveys. In Kirkland, I have an example, which I forwarded along, which I can also show you tonight, about capital improvements for fire services. That's very kind of similar to what we're talking about today. We did polling, and I could show that with you, but obviously these are should be some familiar names to you, other people we work with. Our purpose here on this survey is to investigate opinion and openness to investments in the University Place Police Department. The way to do that is to do a public opinion research survey to ask people in University Place what they think of this idea. And we take them through, assuming they know nothing. We sort of, as the questionnaire goes along, we release little bits of information to figure out if they react. And that tells us how they're going to react to this idea and tells us whether it's worth doing or we need to go back to the drawing board and start over. So just to give you a sense of this, how are we going to do this? The methodology that we use today is a hybrid telephone and text to web, which means that we use both telephone interviews, cell phones and landlines, and we also use text to web, which means we have a web interface where the survey is also posted. People are invited to come do the survey, be the same method, right? A cell phone. And then we sample all voters in the city, and they have an equal chance of being selected. If you think about statistical sampling, throw up 10,000 tennis balls in the air, right? And you're sort of picking out a number of them at random. The idea there is to then represent the entire distribution of those across the city. And so we then attempt people multiple times. Obviously, if we sort of picked you at random, we want to give you an equal chance to get and complete that survey. If we don't get to you, we will try somebody else. And when we do that, if you think about statistical sampling, there's a high likelihood we're going to get somebody who looks a lot, sounds a lot, thinks a lot like you, because University Place, people tend to live next to people who believe the same things as them, who have the same opinions as them, with the same household incomes as them, right? So if we replace that and we then do a total of 300 interviews, we can project those results to the entire voting population of the city within plus or minus 5 percentage points at the 95% confidence interval. That basically means repeat the survey 100 times, you'd see the same results to within plus or minus 5.7 percentage points 95 times out of 100. And at the end, we make sure that the demographics we get back match what we know about the city already. One of the nice things about voter lists is we already know distributions of age, of gender, of geography. So we can ensure that the results that we get back look like the universe that we talk to. Just to give you a brief example here, and I've sent a couple along, so there's other ones that you're not seeing here tonight. I've sent along Renton, I sent along Kirkland. Kirkland's another great example, which we won't go into too much detail, but just to give you a sense of some of the kind of stuff we might ask. Here's some of the results you might see from me in a few weeks or a month or two, whenever we get this done. We might ask a question about the most important problem facing the city. And here in Renton, when we asked this question, it was an open-ended question. People gave us back traffic and crime and safety and homelessness. I heard a lot of homelessness discussions tonight. I'm not sure why that bubble has come up, but let's hope it goes away. It did. And then we asked about approval ratings. So we're going to be doing the same thing on our survey to understand how people think about the job the city is doing on various items, specifically as related to the police department. So we'll get those back in various forms on an excellent all the way to poor rating. And then this should look very similar to what we're talking about now. We asked about a parks proposal in Renton. Renton actually saw these results, and our advice to them was this is not a good idea because look how close these results are, 49-49. That's a really tight one. I don't really know that you want to go through the effort of doing this when it's on a nice edge of passage. It would take a lot of effort to make sure that this did pass at the ballot box, which obviously the city can't do, right? The city's job is to put it on the ballot and then get out of the way, let the citizens have that discussion, let the campaigns do whatever it is they're going to do. So the other day we said probably not a good idea. I have another example that I want to share just briefly from Kirkland. So I'm showing you this is actually on Kirkland's website from one of the council packets. Very similar kind of idea. They asked this question about a bond measure to fund Kirkland Fire Services. You can see the results here are quite a bit different, 64 to 32. So we actually counseled Kirkland to go forward with this. They ended up passing this measure at a little bit higher rate than 64%. I think they ended up passing it into the low 70s. But just to give you a sense, that was very consistent with the results that we found in the high 60s of support. So I'm anticipating one of your questions will be, how does polling still work? I never answer my phone. Well, your neighbors do, and we talk to people all the time. This Kirkland survey was done, just to give you a sense of this, in April of 2020, and then it passed not long after that. So polling still works. The stuff you might have heard about in the national news is pretty much all polls that are done for the media, right? And they're done very cheaply. They're done just to create a news story. I don't really care so much about the results because it's not like anybody's going to hold them accountable. It's different in this situation with me. If we didn't do this the right way, we'd never get hired anymore. We still do. So that's a very quick introduction. I'd be happy to take any of the questions that you might have right now. I see a couple of hands coming up. I don't know if you want me to call on them or you want, or you'd like to do it yourself.
Yep. Council Member Fleming, you have your hands up.
I do, Madam Mayor, and Ian, I appreciated the presentation, and I certainly appreciated the rapidity of it. So
you bet. I know you guys are behind, so
and that was good. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked our staff last time they brought this topic up, that they were looking to have your group do the survey. And as a council member, how can I lend credibility to a survey of which less than 1% of our population is surveyed?
Yeah, I mean, my answer is statistical sampling. The reason that it works is because we're taking a small proportion of people who look like the broader population and we're projecting to that population. Now, we're not infallible, right? So I gave you a margin of error, plus or minus 5.7 percentage points. And I will tell you, we've had a few misses in our career, but it's rare, right? Polling works because of statistical sampling. And the minute that it doesn't work, which maybe that day is coming, I think the answer is it's not. We'll find another way to get the research done. But the day that it doesn't work, we'll be out of business. But until then, statistical sampling works because we're taking a small proportion of the population, ensuring they look like the broader population, and projecting it to that population with that margin of error. We're doing a questionnaire in order that doesn't bias the results. So we're trying to release pieces of information a little bit at a time. We're trying to be as even-handed as we can in presenting this factual information that's presented in front of people and see how they react. The same thing that would happen to your discussions when you think about your council meetings. You start with one concept and say, we don't know much about this. We need to investigate this idea. And at the other end, you and the citizenry learn a whole bunch more about it, and you come to some sort of consensus about the idea. The same thing happens in these surveys. It mimics what would happen in your public discussion. And so, I can tell you we've done this for all those organizations I've talked to. If you have any concerns about it, I would say back to you, ask some of these other cities that we've done this work for and say, what was the process like? How did you get from this point of a small sample to understanding what the citizenry wanted? And over again, we have shown that these results reflect what's happening in the populace if the discussion goes the way that we have simulated. And that's my best answer for you, is that statistical sampling works.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Keel.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ian, for your presentation. We've done polling on this topic, the ultimate polling on this topic twice, and that is we actually ran a bond measure for more police, and it failed both times, and it failed pretty handily. In the 60% one time and 70% another time. And so to me, that's the ultimate poll, right? So I'm hesitant to do another poll, right? To say, what do you think about this? And I'll say that because I don't know much about it, and your presentation gave me a little bit more, but not to the point to where I can say I understand what would be different than what you're proposing as a poll versus the poll vote that we took before, right? I mean, it was real clear, no, both times. And so my mind has gone to maybe we need to poll what caused the people to say no. What is it that you need? What's missing? How do we craft it? That would be the question that I think that needs to be asked this time around. Not would you vote for a police levy today. It'd be more of what do you need and to get to yes, as opposed to are you at yes now? Does that make sense?
It does. And I have three answers. Obviously, I don't sit on the council, so this is not my decision to make. But the three things that I think of when you put something on the ballot, you're right. It is the ultimate test of whether people will support or oppose it. The reason to do a poll like this is to understand whether it's even worth putting it on the ballot in the first place. Because in my experience, cities put these measures on the ballot without knowing the chances. And I tend to agree with you. If you've had two failures in the past, maybe that's just what's going to happen in the city, and we don't have a chance of passing this anytime soon. My argument to you would be, if you do this poll, you're going to understand if you have to put in more effort to do communications with the city and with the citizens to work on, we can't get this passed. What is it that you are interested in? And so the concept here was to say, the police department came back and said, we think we have a package that makes a lot more sense than the last ones we've offered. And here's why we think it's different. And so if we ask those questions and the citizenry says, I'm not interested in this. I don't think this is a good idea. We think our police are doing fine. We don't need this. We're going to have an answer that goes back to the police department that says, you know what? We need to go back to the drawing board. This doesn't make any sense to do. You'll have saved yourself the effort of going to the ballot, making the plans to do that, and then ultimately failing or potentially passing it. So that's my first answer. So I think the second answer is, if that were to happen, if we get back the answer that the city of Renton got with their parks, they eventually abandoned that plan and went a totally different direction. They said, instead of putting this measure on the ballot, which we think doesn't have a chance of passing, we're going to pursue other ways to do parks reform. So that to me would be the direction to the city to say, now it's time to engage the public in a much longer conversation of what policing means in this town and what people want to see and what changes they want to have. This allows you to say, we're going to put the brakes on putting anything in the ballot. It's not a good idea. We don't want to lose again. If we want to go like a ballot, we want this to be successful. So this would be the first step in saying, now how do we engage in a larger process behind that? We also had this discussion of maybe we should do that process first. But the sense of maybe I'm speaking for the staff here, but the sense of the staff was, we've developed something we think makes sense and will be attractive. Let's see if it is before we spend the time going through a much longer process of understanding how we might make this tick. But that's sort of not my department. That's the discussion we've had so far. And the poll is designed to essentially give you that answer. Is it worth going or not?
Thank you for that. And Mayor, if I can just take one step further. So Mr. Sugg, that's the piece that I'm missing. What I think I just heard Ian said. And what he said was, staff thinks that they've got a solution to what policing would be, and that's what they're going to put before the people. If staff thinks that, I haven't heard it, okay? And I hate putting it out there like that in this forum, but but I haven't, and so whatever it is that staff thinks that they have, that's a good policing model that they want to, put out before the people to validate. I would love to hear it first, so I know that what we're putting out there and what people are going to respond to.
Councilmember Keel, I talked a little bit about the staffing model at a retreat this last, was it February or January of this year, where we talked a little bit about the new approach to policing in University Place, where we were talking about a community outreach officer and adding that position to the department, and talked a little bit about what I'm hearing is the number one complaint from our citizens is traffic related. So we talked about the addition of traffic officers in University Place. Maybe there does need to be a more presentation to the council about that plan that we kind of briefly talked about at the retreat. I think that's part of what this survey also does, and we don't want to talk about the specific questions, but some of the survey is actually giving a little bit of the plan to see how the people support that. I don't want to, is that kind of correct, Ian, to talk about the plan is then, do you support not just increasing staffing, but there's a little bit of specifics in it to help see if we're getting to what people want to support. That sound right, Ian?
It does, yeah. As I mentioned before, that's the concept here, is to see, does this make any sense to people or not? If they're not interested, then you'll have that answer, and we'll say, well, we have to go in a different direction. And I think that the way that everyone's expressed it to me, that would be very helpful in understanding what direction this needs to go, and if this is even something that people are willing to entertain. My experience with cities is that when they go out for these measures as that test, we put a whole bunch of effort into this, and then we wait for the ballot to come, and then it fails, and we say, well, what do we do now, right? We didn't get much answer on that, and this is the way to spend more time on these concepts to understand what direction we should take it.
You're muted, Councilmember Keel.
Thank you, Mayor. I do understand more now about the concepts. I just wasn't read in on the concepts. And Chief, I do remember you talking briefly about those in different places. What's missing for me was a nice package, tied up. This is, hey, council, as your police chief, here's the plan that I want to go forward. I think this will be a great thing for, getting people to support police. And I think we need to, get EMC in here to kind of help us with that. All the bases weren't touched, at least in my head. And so I'm sitting out in the right field like, where the heck is the ball? So that's where I'm at. Okay.
Okay.
I do have a question, Mr. Stewart. I am an individual, and many of my friends I've been talking to over the last couple of weeks do not answer unknowns numbers. And if somebody's first thing out of their mouth is, do you have a few minutes for a survey? I give them exactly 2 seconds worth of time. So how are you going to represent, how does this statistically represent the majority of the people that are in my demographic if we don't answer unsolicited calls?
So what we know that people don't pick up unsolicited calls. So for that reason, we use local area codes when we're calling in. And I know that all of you would probably say we don't answer polls, but I have evidence to the contrary that people around you do. So I don't know how better to say it other than as I said, for Kirkland, we did 400 interviews in the city of Kirkland. It looks just like the demographics of Kirkland. And then the ultimate test, as you just talked about a few minutes ago, went to the ballot and they won. So I can't give you better evidence than the hundreds of times that's happened over the years. But I understand that they may not have called you, and I would simply go back to say statistical sampling works. What you're going to see at the end of this is a demographic that looks like the voters in University Place, and I can show you those demographics if we're interested and look at them. But it does work, even though we're not the ones answering the phone.
So I'm assuming even though your polling number, the final tally that you want to come up with is 300, but you're calling 600 or 900 or 1,000 people to get 300 that minimum that answer.
Correct.
hopefully you get more than that 300, correct?
Yeah, that's right. We definitely have to make more contacts. And remember, we're talking about landlines and phones, so people have different ways of contacting each other, right? But we're doing all those methods, and yes, we are doing more outreach than we need to get to that 300.
Okay, and when we get the polling results, we will get the demographics associated with those numbers to give us that level of confidence.
That's right. I mean, we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't match those, right? If we ensure that we were representing the audience that we thought was who you actually wanted to hear from.
Okay. All right. I see Mayor Pro Tem Worthington. You raised your hands.
Thank you, Mayor Bellisi. Yes, I did. So a question that I had, Mr. Stewart, is you can test a particular question, and that basically tied potentially to a ballot issue. Can you test variations of a question? So you can ask if the favorite color is green, but can you ask them if you like green but a little more blue or a little more something else in it?
I mean, that's a relatively generic example, so I think the answer is yes. Yes, I mean, the idea behind doing this is to get a sense of what is it about what we're offering are people interested in. And so there is a bit of that color variation as you described it. This survey in particular won't spend all that much time on those options because the set isn't all that big, but we really are trying to understand whether what you're hearing when you're doing your community meetings and town halls, when you're hearing about nuisance cars and homelessness, and you're hearing about coverage at night from the police and the statistics that you have about what that coverage looks like, whether people are in fact concerned about that or feel like maybe their answer is University Place Police are doing a great job and I feel like they've got all the money they need and we don't need to do this. So that's the kind of answer you're going to get back, right? Is which permutation of these concerns match up with what they think, and what sort of job do they think that they're already being served, right? Because the keys to handing over more money is there a need? Do I trust who's going to do it? And do I see that the plan makes sense? And so those are the three things we're going to be testing here.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember McCluskey, I see you raised your hand.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, that was you just answered one of my concerns, is that one of the concerns was the trust in the city government, which was one of the reasons why the last levy failed, and also the fund that it was tied to. Also, they didn't want it tied to the property tax or the utility, because I think on both those issues that it failed on that piece too. So to get through those hurdles, to feel how they're feeling at this point in time would be important. And also, hopefully, they also feel that there is a greater need to increase the police presence on the street. Certainly, traffic is one of the complaints I hear a lot about, but also property theft and damage too would be of their interests as well. And also the change in the scope of what they're perceiving as the police function with the state legislators' new rules of engagement. I'm sure they're concerned about that piece too, and the community-oriented policing that will be impacted by that. If we could increase funding, we could probably increase that component to the services too. And the other comment you made was that you believe that our community has the same values. That's why we live together in this community. I think otherwise. I think that we have different people, a wide range of diversity, and some of those are never reached. And I would like to see that area, that population in the survey, rather than just those who regularly vote. Who are the payers? Who will be paying out of pocket as well? particularly the homeowners, the landlords. They would probably be of keen interest to increasing the public safety pieces to that. So I'll be interested in those sort of outcomes of your survey too. And because in the end of the day, we understand that not only is it the voters, and it's typically the same voters that are more physically conservative that vote here in University Place. How do we get past that to gain their trust and their support into a policing program that they're willing to pay money for? That's all my comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, did you have additional follow-up comments?
I did have one more question. I'll make it brief. So what's the shelf life of your information? If we ask it today, how long should we think about it as being fresh, if you will?
That's a great question. So the way that we like to think of it is there needs to be something significant in the civic conversation to make it age out, right? So a survey like this in a city where we don't have daily headlines about the city, the police department, things like that. My guess is you've got many, many months where this is going to be valid and things won't change. I think you also have a sense, all of you are very well connected to the city, right? So you're going to know if there's a change in the conversation, if something has happened, whatever, whether positive or negative, as it relates to police issues, you would know that things have changed. So my sense is you have a long shelf life. And the discussion that we've had here is exactly what is the right timing for you to consider, right? And so that has been one we batted around quite a bit about what's the right time to go. We've been talking about, sometime in September this year makes a lot of sense because it gives us a roadmap for the next couple of years. I think you've got, 6 months, maybe even longer of this shelf life making a lot of sense. And then beyond that, one would think that you're going to start discussing this at some point of saying this plan makes sense. We're going to start pursuing it and putting all the pieces you'd need to do together to be able to go do that. So at some point, more information will come out, and then people will start to hear the things that we tested in the survey, right? And they will see progress towards an ultimate goal, and that information that we released will suddenly become true, and we're still on that path. So I could see, a year and a half, 2 years as a long answer for what it might look like. But if we continue on that same path of information that we included in the survey, you can imagine people gaining more and more information about what we said that leads to the same conclusion, a year and a half from now. But that's a great question. It's a little hard to put our fingers on that, but I think we can all say, when you see the results, you can say, well, I can see where we diverged from the path at some point. We feel like this is no longer what we tested back there because here's a set of circumstances that have changed in the city. Maybe the legislature passes a different mandate that changes what policing is supposed to look like in our state. Well, now all of a sudden we've got a different mandate we have to deal with, and then things have changed. So it's a great question, and it's also the kind of question we encourage our clients to call us back on all the time. If something has changed, you'd say, hey, here's what's developed in town. Do we still feel like this is valid? And hopefully it'll stay valid for you for quite a while, but it's a really good question, and it's got a bunch of answers.
Your mandate question is very timely. So since we have that going on and the discussion's underway for the next year or so.
Yeah, and I feel like that mandate really has to fundamentally change the approach that we've been talking about. I can't answer that question of whether it does or not.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from council on this issue? Okay, I would like to thank both of you gentlemen for the study session item this evening. So thank you very much, and I know it's not a discussion that's going to terminate anytime soon. So just be on our radar, so thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
Chief.
The final item on the agenda is the American Rescue Plan, the ARPA update. That was scheduled for a 30-minute discussion period. We are now 15 minutes before the end of our scheduled time. So I'm going to provide council with options. We can either extend our meeting for 15 minutes or we can table this item for a future agenda. It is not a vital update at this point that requires us to provide guidance to staff.
I think we should table it.
So how many would like to table it? Raise your hand. All right. So this will be oh, Mr. Keel, you want to keep going, huh?
I just have a question. Is there an opportunity for us to apply for dollars or make some decisions around dollars that will, if we don't talk about it now, that will put us behind?
No, I already checked with staff. There's no sense of urgency to discuss it this evening.
Okay, well, your question and my question are two different questions, but it could be interpreted two different questions, but okay, I'll go with that.
No, yeah. I had already checked on that, and I'm not aware of anything being tied to our decision or guidance to staff at this point. Okay, since I see a consensus of the council that this item be tabled for a future item, I'm going to let the Mayor Pro Tem and I discuss it at our next agenda setting meeting on Monday. And I just want to let council know that I will not be at our next meeting on September 7th, as I will be out of country. But I will leave it in the capable hands of our Mayor Pro Tem to facilitate that meeting. So I will be seeing you guys on the 20th of September. So not having any further items on the agenda, I am going to announce this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Have a good travel.
Yeah, thanks.